Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Whitmire. I'm the co-founder and CEO of FloQast, inactive CPA. Welcome to Blood, Sweat, and Balance Sheets, the podcast where we chat with entrepreneurs, executives from a variety of industries, and quite frankly, with whoever I want to. And the goal is to help provide advice and interesting stories to guide people's careers. For today, we have our guest, Nick Leopard. I thought it was a fascinating conversation for the accounts on the line. You get to learn a little bit more about debt financing, private equity operations, what fundraising is like, and the importance of taking the leap to start your own business. So excited for the conversation today. Nick, could you tell us where you're calling in from today and a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, Mike, thanks for having me on. Love the podcast. So get the chance to be in the spotlight was looking forward to it. So thanks.
Appreciate that.
So I am dialing in from much colder temps than you in LA. I'm just outside New York. We live. I have a home on the North Shore of Long Island. So from my home office.
Nice. Well, awesome. And I'd love to just dig right in and learn more about your career. It's been a really interesting background, and I find it fascinating where you've ended up today and kind of what you're working on. So if you wouldn't mind just taking it from the top and, understanding how you started your career and the journey you've taken.
Yeah. So I kind of think about careers as like you kind of get brought to a place, sort of some of all your experiences. I went to a Jesuit school in Philadelphia, from DC originally, just outside DC in Maryland. And when I was graduating college, there was a startup commercial finance company in Chevy Chase, Maryland, being launched. It was called Capital Source, and had raised the most amount of private equity capital for a financial services company in U.S. history. So it was exciting. I'd interned with a couple of the leaders while in college, and got asked to come in and play sort of a very junior business development role. And there it was founded by a guy named John Delaney, who was just a Democratic candidate in last year's presidential election. Mm-hmm. And it was just, he was young. He was probably late 30s at the time. The company was a wild success within 3 years. So it was a $3 billion market cap company. And what I learned from that, and it was, I took it with me throughout my careers. It was a highly energetic entrepreneurial firm, but doing sophisticated work, not unlike Accordion today. But the culture was really, really tight. And I still have, many friends from that organization. And so I took that and spent a few years there. And then I went into investment banking at Bear Stearns. I had, funny story, I had met my now wife during that time. We were dating long distance from DC to New York. Took a job in investment banking and was like, hey, I'll be able to see you more. Well, like you're in New York, and I went up there, took a banking job. I probably saw her less living about 10 blocks away than I did when we lived a 5-hour drive away.
Yeah, what were the hours like in that new investment banking role?
So I had I think the benefit of working in this group that was really capital markets focused within IB. So we had the benefit of the early morning hours of traders and the back end hours of investment banking. So
all right,
7:30 till 1 or 2 in the morning.
Yeah, I've heard stories. We in the audit world, we like to think we work a lot during busy season, but I don't know if it's appreciated how much investment bankers work year round. It's a year round phenomenon. Yeah. Back to Capital Source. So it was effectively a startup when you joined. It was early, but they had raised a lot of money. And when you say $3 billion market cap, was it a publicly traded organization?
Yeah. So it started, it'll come full circle because our own private equity investors now, FFL partners, were investors in Capital Source at the time. And so it was Farallon out of San Francisco was invested in FFL. And it was just, startup business plan and just needed a big balance sheet to provide senior mezzanine debt. And within 3 years, that's when we went public and traded. And then now it's part of the bank. But
ballpark, how many employees were there through that growth stage?
I was employee 68. And when I had left, there was about 450.
Okay. Wow. So maintaining culture through that type of growth is super. I'm excited to hear what you've done at Accordion, what you've taken from that experience to keep that at Accordion. But cool. Let's keep it rolling. Let's move forward.
So did banking. I was in the financial institutions group. Capital Source was actually a client of ours at the time. And then I left Bear just, by happenstance, left there 6 months prior to Bear blowing up, and went to a mezz fund that had been recruiting me. And it was a small $200 million mezz fund, short-term debt. And when the downturn hit of the great financial crisis, we ended up owning half the companies in our portfolio and had to take a really hands-on approach to the companies. And what I found was, we were stretched very thin. Our CFOs, more than anything, needed tons of support. And when we looked across the landscape to get them support, it wasn't the big four and it wasn't the strategy consulting firms like a McKinsey or a Bain. What we really needed was an extension of basically a private equity portfolio operations group. And there was no firm out there that existed during that time. And I was about, I was 28 at the time, and I was really sort of really looking to start my own company or go buy something and run it. And then this sort of observation came up. It's like saying private equity, like the rise of the operating partner in private equity firms is only getting more and more prevalent. The view on value creation is getting more and more in the spotlight with LPs and GPs alike. And portfolio operations groups were sort of nascent at the time. And so if we need all this help for our portfolio companies to provide Office of the CFO support, that means the rest of the industry will likely need a lot of that support. So started working on the idea of Accordion, the name coming from the ability to expand and contract, us being very surgical, go in and provide support to various portfolio companies. And just, I guess having enough blinders on or, confidence, launched Accordion in November 2009, 4 months after we had our first kid. So kind of just had to.
Oh, man. Yeah. That'll light a fire under you, right? When you got a mortgage and a kid and you got to make it happen. So I'd love to pull it a little higher level for the audience. When you're doing, mezz banking, what are you actually doing on a day-to-day basis? What does the job look like? And then would love to dig into, things like what's an LP? How does a private equity firm operate? What is the operations group there? Who kind of kicked off and got that popular? How has it evolved? And how does Accordion fit into the bigger picture?
Yeah. So as part of banking at Bear in the financial institutions group, a lot of our focus was on capital markets transactions, whether that be issuing debt, going for further equity, follow-on offerings. So beyond, that could be an IPO or it could be follow-on offering, just continuing to raise equity. We were very much focused on balance sheet optimization with our clients, and especially financial institutions having like a bank or an insurance company. You have to have certain levels of regulatory capital, and that means various classifications of that capital around like deposits, debt on hand, equity you're raising in order to meet the regulatory requirements. It gets pretty complex, and therefore we had dedicated teams to a lot of these insurance companies and commercial finance companies and depositories. And then when I left Bear and went to a mezz fund, it wasn't just focused on financial institutions. It was really focused on small, lower, middle market companies. They're truly like operational companies. So it was really interesting work alongside the CEOs and CFOs and talk about their capital requirements in order to fuel their growth plans. And so you truly feel, at a fund of that size, like a true partner to management teams and helping them, really get the backing to achieve those goals.
So that's a really interesting point. When I was an auditor, I'm looking at debt and everything, and I'll see one of my clients take on a bunch of debt. And my take was, oh man, they're in trouble. They got their hat out looking to borrow money from people. And I wonder what that process is like. So how would you describe it? I mean, is it a deal where people are kind of begging you for money? We need this to stay afloat, or are you proactively trying to find companies that you could work with and you think you could, deploy the capital intelligently with?
Yeah, it all goes in cycles as well of like,
that makes perfect sense. Yep.
Pulling the strings back. The companies that are, grade A companies, great management teams, they are, got sound balance sheets, sound strategies, consistent growth. They've got their pick of the litter. I mean, you can go to any of the commercial banks and like they want to back you. We were looking for a little bit more of the hairier ones, ones that where you truly had to understand the story and align around, do we believe in this management team? Do we believe in a little bit of the pivot or change in market dynamics as to why they're going to thrive? The returns certainly reflected the risk that we were taking on. And so we had to be good at choosing credits that we wanted to get behind at the time. And so therefore you had to, it's highly thought-provoking because you really have to truly understand like business models and truly have to understand like market dynamics and customer needs and the management team's ability to execute against that plan and ultimately be able to both service and repay the debt financing you're providing.
And if you wouldn't mind summarizing, what's the difference between mezzanine financing and sort of what the average person would view as your normal type of debt?
Yeah, totally. There's senior financing, and then there's whatever you call sub debt, mezzanine financing, sort of second in line. And then below that would be equity. And so in the case of a win, you'd say you had $100 million value company, $50 million of debt, so the equity value is $50 million. And so if you took that company and turned it into $200 million, there's still only $50 million of debt. That means that $50 million of equity just increased in size to $150 million. Mm-hmm. Now, so that's using leverage to benefit the equity returns. Let's just say it was the same $100 million company. You've got $50 million of debt. Call it, $30 million of that is senior debt, $20 million of that is mezzanine debt. Now the company goes sideways. And so you take $100 million, say it went down to $40 million in value. That's all the company's worth. You got to liquidate the company. The equity just got wiped completely. $10 million of that mezzanine money is next in line. And then the senior is, so you might get $10 million left. And then the senior of $30 million is made whole there. So it's next in line from a security perspective.
And that's why you make the comment of you take on more risk. As such, you get more returns with it. You're sort of in the middle between the VCs who are all in it for a 10x return and are occasionally fine going bankrupt versus you guys want a bit of a return, but take on some risk, which puts you in a really interesting, I'm just kind of reiterating the point, but that's a fascinating spot where your business model plus trying to understand strategy, it's a bit of an investment play for you as well. Look at the management team.
Sort of equity risk along the way.
Yeah. Fascinating. And then, okay, so debt is then a popular play in the PE world, and that's where you started getting involved in. So would love to understand, how debt is thought along with operations and improving the company and what the goal is there.
So, that sort of led to the catalyst of like what I mentioned before, like during the downturn, just from that example alone, we ended up owning half the companies in our portfolio because they couldn't service their debt. The equity gets wiped clean. We're next in line. Now we're like, we have to salvage this company and be able, in order to save our, the principal amount that we've got lent to these companies. And therefore, it took a lot of hands-on approach to saying, okay, let's give the CFO the resources they need to either sell off assets, to refinance us out, and to help out with like various, call it strategic analysis around like profitability by certain division or, by customer. So you can start to make decisions around, hey, should we be investing more in this side of the business or should we be exiting this part of the business and hopefully like right the ship on these. And so therefore that went from just an investing standpoint from our standpoint to an operational standpoint where we needed to take more of a hands-on approach to our portfolio companies. And so over the last, from a trend perspective, we can talk about private equity, over the last like 20 years, KKR was one of the first that like really did it. They said, look, it's one thing for all of us to invest. There's lots of smart people across Wall Street, but how do we build an operations group who can be former executives of like big companies or functional experts? So we're talking like CEOs, CFOs, COOs there, or functional experts like a great sales like person or a finance person or called procurement or talent. And how do we bring that and then deploy those resources into all of our portfolio companies to help them not only give them capital, but to improve as a company as well on a proactive basis, not just when something's going wrong. And so KKR's portfolio operations group was called Capstone, but we're talking about KKR. And then there's like the rest of like all the private equity funds, and it's a pretty large but fragmented industry who just may not be able, because of size and can talk about management fees and how that works, but because of size, may not have the resources that KKR has. So with the rise of the importance of saying, hey, how do we support our companies? Accordion set out to focus just on private equity, and from a functional perspective, only just on the office of the CFO. So build almost a bolt-on portfolio operations group that the private equity industry can turn to us and say, hey, we have something going on in the finance function. We think if we get this right, then we can solve a lot of problems within the organization, or go capitalize on opportunities that present themselves around, call it like better planning processes, and that could get a better supply chain, or it could help us be more profitable in these markets. So if it had to do with the finance function, that the private equity industry would turn to Accordion and say, that's the gold standard. We call Accordion as partners for everything we do in the finance function.
Yeah. So you would get these relationships going with specific firms, and then they roll you out to all the new companies that they acquire. And we have kind of a similar play with our software going on. And we have noticed that when these acquisitions get made, it seems like finance is the low-hanging fruit, and things get cleaned up over there. It is operationally challenged, but once you get that sorted out, that's how you can then get insight into the rest of the business. Is that what you've seen? It's like, what percentage of private equity acquisitions would you say Accordion's brought into to help clean up finance?
Yeah, I mean, we serve about 200 different private equity funds now, and the not to like dissimilar from like FloQast, like you get into the SOPs of those private equity funds, and they're like, oh, we implement FloQast into every single one of ours because it helps accelerate the monthly close process. It gives another tool for the CFOs. And so, if you think about companies that are built, they're all different shapes and sizes. Sometimes there's companies that are built before private equity is founder run. They've built a heck of a business, but like the business all of a sudden just got pretty large. Now you have institutional capital coming in, and they've seen this story before. If you're going from a $50 or $100 million business, and the goal is to go to a $200 million business, a $300 million business, there's just going to be different demands. And they've seen around the corner before, and we've seen around the corner. So, hey guys, go work with like the CFO. This isn't a reflection on them doing something wrong. It's more saying, let us help you take the next step. So you're going to need new technology systems in there. You're going to need new processes. You need to think about the finance organization, upskilling and give them the tools that they need to look at the business in new ways. And then there's like larger companies that you may have a Blackstone or Apollo, go and say, hey, we're buying, sizable companies, and then buying their peers. And all of a sudden, like there's a lot of merger integration that has to occur within the office of the CFO, or they're expanding geographically. And you need to think about how does cash, transfer across, various geographic regions. That's where we'll come in and really play that support function. And look, starting a business is like, it's never easy, no matter what industry you're in. And so for us, we're building the relationship with those private equity funds, like you have to do it once, you have to do a great job, and then you have to do it twice. And then all of a sudden it like spreads like wildfire across like private equity like team. And so some teams are like very centralized, like, hey, we turn to Accordion, buy for everything we do. Some are managed by each individual partner within that private equity fund.
Okay.
So you've got to build a reputation, and then you really develop trusted partnerships. But we are about 11 and a half years in, and it takes time to build those relationships.
Takes time, but I like to say the best business development tool is a great reputation and great service, and they go hand in hand. And it is the way to do it the most cost efficiently as well. You're not spending money on sales and marketing resources either. One of the things that I want to have entrepreneurs' backs a little bit here, because that is common where, you scale up as a company and maybe you have some operational debt. For example, we've been talking about this at FloQast, looking around the company, where might we have some operational debt and how can we clean up some of these processes ahead of scaling? But we're weird because we have a background in accounting and processes and think about this stuff like way too far out in the future. So for the audience, I feel like what happens is most entrepreneurs, more from a sales or an engineering background, it's about getting clients or getting users, and that's the focus on growing the business and then raising money. And you might forget about things like HR processes or compliance in certain areas. And that is where the opportunity lies a little bit later with the private equity firms is, hey, great business, great product, customers love them, but not all that efficient from an operating perspective. We can come in here and probably be really impactful, clean things up, and increase the value of the the company, right? If I had to be briefly summarized. Yep.
Beautifully.
Which makes perfect sense. If I'm like one of our investors, right, Insight Ventures, if I'm putting 50 million bucks into a company, I want to help them, and it's totally worth it to have a bit of an internal operations team and take on that expense to increase your investment by that much. And I'll tell you, just we work with Insight's operating group. They're great because it's not too hands-on. They're available for us, but they're not overbearing. So this whole notion of an operating group can be really scary for a lot of entrepreneurs. It's like, oh no, the PE firm's coming down on me, but it's not necessarily like that. If you find the right partner, it can be super valuable for your organization.
I think that's a lot of entrepreneurs like that are like exploring taking on private equity capital. It is such an intimate relationship with private equity firms for like, you're taking on a five-year relationship, and on average, and it's not even about the fund, it's about the specific deal partner there as well. Yeah. And like, you have to almost define what you're looking for going into that process. Am I looking for somebody who's going to be totally hands-on because I know I've got blind spots and I need them to be a real coach in my ear? Or do I want somebody to, allow me to be an operator? They can be an investor and then ask the right challenging questions. And then when you think about like Insight's got a great like ops group, and I think like they have an ops group that the market is sort of moving more towards of being like, hey, we want to be called puppet master versus puppet. Like we want to be able to give suggestions to our management teams, and then if they want to do something, we'll bring in the right resources like an Accordion or other resources that may be out there, but not necessarily do the work. And so. Yeah. That's been a pendulum that's swung a little bit in the last 10 years. There's been ops groups that like get right into like the companies aren't doing the work, and it freaks people out a little bit. Like,
yeah,
where like their investors are in the company as well.
The reputation I've heard of being the most intense on that front would be Vista, having the proprietary playbook and rolling it out and kind of taking over. But you're right, it's not one size fits all. There's a spectrum of that, and talking to the investors and understanding that is super important up front. Like I had to make that very clear with Insight, and we ran an alignment, and so it's nothing but value add for us. But all right, let's take it back to Accordion. What was starting the firm and building it up like? All of a sudden you're running the whole thing. So what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, if you want something done, you kind of give it to a busy person. And like, I was talking to a very close friend of mine who's starting a new company. He's got a couple of kids. He's got a house like outside the city. And he's like, dude, this like has to work. Or, like someone's got to give. I was like, you have no choice. Like it has to work. And so like, it's probably the best pressure you can get, like put on yourself, like just has to. And so I kind of look back on that as very like fond years.
I actually think that's a super important piece of advice I just want to double down on. There's a big notion that you can do something as a side hustle and see if it works out and if it's going to turn into a business.
Yeah.
Would love to hear your take on it.
I just want my own personal investing strategy, as I've been doing more of in the last couple of years, is like, I've started to define that personal investing strategy, but if it's a side hustle, like I'll never invest in it. It's like if somebody I'm not even concerned about like how much money that person's putting into the business. But if they're like putting it all out there and like it has to work for them, like I'll back that person. Like, as long as I believe in them and their strategy, I'll back that person all the time because it has to work.
Yeah.
So like when I started, Accordion's a consulting business. And I think 98% of consulting businesses are built as a lifestyle. Hey, I'm good at my craft. I'm going to build this. And then what happens with those, they may build a decent business, but they never think about brand. They never think about infrastructure. They never think about like, what's our longer term go-to-market strategy. And then they get capped out. And which like, they just like, they sort of hit the point that like, we don't know how to grow any further because it was a lifestyle business. So when I started Accordion, I was studying a lot of other very successful services businesses and said, look, I'm not going to bootstrap this myself. I'm going to go out and raise capital. I was 29 years old, went out to buddies of mine, like the only guys I knew had made like some decent money, and said, hey, will you back me? And someone were like, I have no idea what you're doing, but I'll back you. And I said, great. Yeah. And so like, that just goes further. It's like your friend's money and like, all right, like it has to, we spend a lot of time together, it has to work. So, raised a little bit of capital in the beginning. And frankly ran it unprofitable for the first several years. Just kept reinvesting everything into the business, and had a lot of like really good mentors along the way. But like you're scraping by, and like we were living in the West Village at the time. And I remember put our office in Soho originally because I spent all these years in Midtown. And I was just like, I just want to be able to walk to the office, and it's just like cool office, something totally different in financial services. Like the whole mission around Accordion was a better way to work in finance. And so, not as stuffy, just like, very much like a very entrepreneurial place, high energy. And so put the office in Soho. But I remember I was walking to work one day, and, our son was like in nursery school. My wife's calling, like, we barely have any money in our bank account. Like we need like to pay for like nursery school. And I'm like, all right, like I'll figure it out. And so it's like, you just kind of scrape by and you like figure these things out along the way. And it's like stories and times like that you look back and you're like they're defining moments where you just like lean in, and it's like you wake up at 4 a.m. and you're working like far more than you ever went in investment banking, because it means like so much more to you when you're trying to build something.
I think the other area that people don't necessarily appreciate is the brain space. I mean, I am always thinking about FloQast. Is Accordion just like always on your mind?
Yeah, it's like, it's constant. I think like my family can see it at times when I'm just like, half listening, and, I've got, a notes app or a to-do app in my phone. I'm like, just so I can actually try to be in like present, like, just like, let me write it down and come back to it later. But, now organization's like much bigger, but it's still on your mind, like all the time. Like you're not doing QuickBooks yourself anymore, and you're not like, you're worried about like calling the cleaning services. Like you're not doing that stuff anymore, but it's just much bigger, like things that take like deep, like brain space. And so, one of the things like I still do, I always did at the very beginning, was like, I try to find some quiet time in the morning. And so, I try to read like, the Journal and like the New York Post for like my gossip, like in the morning. I usually stop at a coffee shop.
Something light. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, and that would be more like at least an hour. And then, or like, even like Harvard Business Review, I read like religiously, and it's just like sparks these ideas in that brain space of being alone and just like writing things down. And like, that to me is like so sacred, just from like a creativity perspective. And so, and then the other thing is just like making time for like personal wellness and like working out. Like I haven't mentioned this, but like on Friday morning, like I've got 5 broken ribs right now. Friday morning, ran into the boards, so I've got like 8 fractures. But like it was less than 48 hours later. Like it's just like I can't sit still. And like got like back on the Peloton, like I've spun for an hour like every single day, just like. Ooh. But it, like that is just like the mental clarity, like it just gives you like that. To me is like, all right, I need time like alone from the thinking perspective. I need time for like physical activity every single day. I'm pretty religious about that, and it's just like the energy and the ideation that comes from that has been really powerful. Yeah,
the heads down work can be very mind consuming, and just doesn't allow you to think bigger. So I'm fascinated by the next part of the story, but you got any war stories from the early days when you were burning cash down to the ground and trying to make it work? You have any war stories you want to share?
One of the guys I worked with at this fund, older gentleman, he had run an insurance company, real mentor of mine. And like it was like every third Tuesday, like I'd stay at the office like pretty late and just do like QuickBooks, like all the journal entries and all that. And I'm like, I'm not an accountant, and I shouldn't be doing that at all. And I just realized, like, some point, it was probably like 2 or 3 years in, I was like, oh my God, we don't have like enough cash to like make payroll. And so I had to call him up, and I was like, hey, Ian, like I don't think I'm gonna make payroll. If we can't pay our employees, like it's a people business. Those are our assets. And so he's like, all right, like how much do you need? Like 25? I'm like 50. And he's like, all right, I'll wire it tomorrow. And it was like, look, we're like, we got the runway for like, or we got the cash coming in. It's just not there like tomorrow. And I was like, if we lose the people and they like don't think we can make payroll, then we're gonna lose like our whole asset. So like having people around you, surrounding you as like cheerleaders has been key. And that's been something we've always focused on. It's like cheerleaders in the market, telling the growth story, getting people excited about it, and sort of rooting for you from the sidelines can do a ton. And then when you need things like that, like especially in the early days, it matters. And then we've got another, one of the guys who invested in Accordion was a guy named Alec Gettle. He started a VC-backed company called Axiom Legal. And very similar, I'd never even heard about it before, but they took big law firm lawyers out of the legal industry and said, hey, let us supplement in-house counsel. And there's sort of a different take on law. And I went to the website and I was like, oh my God, like I had this like emotional reaction to the brand. And like, I love it, like branding, marketing, like even down to like interior design, like all that, like you want people to have an emotional reaction, like that stuck out to me. I'm like, our office, our brand will always have something that is truly unique relative to the rest of the industry. And it's been a huge competitive advantage for us. And it's just having, mentors around me like that really kind of help save us at times.
All right, let's move into the Maestro component here. So you're working, you're helping out companies. Tell me more about how you started to productize this.
Yeah, so Maestro is a SaaS business that takes private equity, call it value creation plans per portfolio company, and puts them into one single platform so they can manage all the portfolio companies in one cloud-based software platform. So it comes from very much. I remember I was in LA and I was in Ares Capital's office, and while there, one of the operating partners there who like helps like manage a bunch of portfolio companies was like, Nick, like you guys see everything across portfolios. Do you guys have like playbooks that we can sort of look at to say every time we invest in this company, we're going to do this, this, and this? And I was like, yeah, Andy, we've got that. Yeah, we'll get back to you. And we walk out, and a colleague of mine was like, do we really have playbooks that they can like go through and at least check the box on all their companies that they're buying? I was like, no, but by like Monday, we're going to have it.
We got a weekend.
Yeah. So we started doing that. We did it with the finance playbook. Then we went out to like partners in the marketplace. Like, hey, we need like an HR playbook and we need like a technology playbook. And clients kept asking us for it. I'm like, start looking at the market because we're sitting there like helping private equity funds think about how they manage their companies. I'm like, for as sophisticated as an industry as private equity is and the individuals there, the way that the industry works is rather archaic and it's very unstructured. Like, Mike, you and I could be the same private equity fund, and I could be a great like cost optimization person, and you could be a great salesperson. The companies you manage, you're going to just focus on top line growth. And mine, I'm going to focus on ripping costs out. But how do we bring the power of all that knowledge of one firm and put it into one place to get the benefit to all the companies? Or, a sort of a network of board members or different groups you use, like everyone uses something different. There's all this unstructured work that happens in private equity. And now the private equity industry is starting to actually go through this maturation process. And so we're like, because of our lens across all of the whole private equity industry, we've got probably a better view on where the industry is going than any of the individual players. So we built Maestro to basically house a private equity firm's secret sauce. We're not telling private equity firms how they should do it, but you should be taking all the individual playbooks that you have, put them in one place. Take all the companies you have in your portfolio and map out the key major strategic initiatives. Management teams can log in there. No longer do you have to go back and look at like management or monthly operating reports or board packs. Let's track our progress against those monthly initiatives. Let's track the KPIs relative to those initiatives in one place. Let's put leadership assessments in there so we got a clear view on like how are we doing from a leadership development standpoint. And all that had never been done before. I mean, there's plenty of like workflow management systems like a Monday.com or an Asana like out there, but nothing purpose-built for private equity. And we sat in a very unique position to be able to build that. And so I'm not a software guy by background, nor was my sort of co-founder of that is our CFO. It's sort of a skunkworks project inside Accordion that we built, and we leveraged our distribution platform out into the private equity market. And the ideas coming from our own team. And we built Maestro, which we think is truly on the cusp of changing how the industry really operates. So that we started to really invest behind that over a period of about 2.5 years. And what we realized over time was you run a consulting business and you run a software business two different ways, as you know. I mean, it's you've been running a very successful one for a long time, and either culturally, cash flow dynamics, all of it. And so we said, in order to realize maximum potential of Maestro, like it can be its own standalone entity. So last year, in partnership with our own private equity firm, that's Growth Investors, FFL Partners, we all agreed, like, okay, let's go stand this up on its own. A little bit of unorthodox approach of saying, should we split this division off, which most companies would love to have a SaaS component to service this business. But we thought, as two entities, it would be worth a lot more, and the focus and the cash flow investments that you need on both sides would be better utilized as two separate entities. So we hired a CEO, and in the middle of COVID last year, we had been starting to interview ahead of COVID, pump the brakes for a little bit. Great guy named Omar Davina. He was a chief revenue officer of an AI company called Eigen, high flyer with VC backing. And then we ultimately embarked on a capital raise this summer. It's pretty competitive, but from strategics, like we didn't need capital. We had plenty of capital. So we basically went to market and was like, look, we're looking for strategic capital. Those can really help the success of it. So ultimately, we closed that round, the true Series A round, in November. S&P Global Market Intelligence led the round. It was they bought Capital IQ, bought SNL Financial.
Yeah,
they've been phenomenal on the public market side, but they really want to own the private capital markets data, and that's a very hard place to break into. And then we brought in a bunch of individuals from across the private equity industry as individual investors to truly make it like the industry product. So that is continuing to develop and really start to transform the industry.
You mentioned looking for strategic investors there. Clearly, the S&P name holds a lot, but what is it about that specifically that is strategic for Maestro?
Yeah, great question. We were very much enamored. Really good entrepreneurial team there. As big of a company as S&P is, their corporate development group and the ones that are in market intelligence group, truly idea generating, really valued what we were trying to do with Maestro. And so if you think about all the data that something like Capital IQ has, or SNL Financial, or just like S&P Market Intelligence overall, to be able to leverage that data on both sides where we're able to, in order to bring benchmark data into Maestro. And so to be able to look at various trends, how do we stack up against other like portfolio companies, that we ultimately believe Maestro will become the biggest source of private company information. Our ability to aggregate and anonymize and create work product out of that.
Yeah,
we think will be highly valuable to the private equity industry, because now not only do you get to understand where your private companies benchmark against other competitive companies, but to make better investment decisions. You're saying, all right, I'm looking at this new one. Let me go into my Maestro platform, see the private company benchmarks of all the companies we've invested in or looked at, or you bring the power of S&P to the table as well. And now we make better investment decisions, or we are able to understand areas of opportunity to improve after we make this investment.
Yeah, okay. So this is super fascinating. You're making information that the highest level people have available to every private equity firm, basically, with benchmarking capital, understanding of playbooks. It seems like I'm going to throw the term out there. You're democratizing private equity, making it a little more transparent. And
what we want to do is more within the walls of a private equity fund. Put all the portfolio company information in one place, so they can use their own proprietary information in order to make better decisions, we call it effectiveness and efficiency, make faster decisions, be much more efficient how we do things, but also be effective with management teams in order to understand where things are on track, where things are not on track, in order to make better decisions. And then from a data perspective, you're going back to the proprietary side. It's their information all in one place, but being able to leverage S&P data that's available through something like Capital IQ, or being able to aggregate anonymized data in order to leverage that to make better decisions. Nothing proprietary is getting out of the walls of a private equity fund, but they are able to leverage that, I think, to go faster and make better decisions.
Yeah, that benchmarking across the whole private company ecosystem feels like that's data that's not available today, right? So interesting vision. Very, very cool. I like it. So what made you decide to not be CEO of that company, of Maestro?
Not having a software background.
That's fair.
I love the place in Accordion. Maestro was this great process of developing the whole vision for what it should be, the product. I love playing chairman to that. It's a phenomenal team. But my baby has always been Accordion, the culture, just being around the people, and then leveraging that as I think a thought leadership person in the industry and working with so many great private equity funds. I love that position, being able to take that role in Accordion and be able to provide value to the team at Maestro in order to grow. It was something that I've always been really passionate about. It was staying true to Accordion, and we've got great investors in the company, and we'll take this through multiple turns of private equity over the next 10, 15 years.
And last question for you before we wrap up, I appreciate your time. This has been super interesting. What is being a chairman like? How high level do you stay? Do you get into different areas, or are you really trying to stay hands off? Would just love to understand kind of where you think the line of delineation is.
Yeah, it's a little bit different of being founder and chairman versus I think being chairman, coming in. I'm pretty hands-on with it, where our cadence is we've got a standing Thursday morning call with the CEO every single week, go through all the major issues throughout the week. I've got various calls into hey, let's talk about sales. How can I help from a pipeline perspective, where I'll call the head of product and say, we just actually hired head of product out of a insight portfolio company called VTS. So he just came over.
Nice. FloQast client. Good.
There you go. Yeah. So I'll call him and say, hey, here's where, I'm seeing the industry move. Here's some pain points I see in, private equity. And so with that, I'm still very much involved in some of those discussions, but not having to run that business day to day and all the intricacies of running a software business. I am very happy in that sort of chairman and co-founder role.
That's awesome. Well, very, very cool. So we've chatted through a lot. We've talked through a lot. Any highlights that you want to leave the audience with or double down on, reiterate?
I think making the leap is, it's hard. Building a business is hard. This, Mike. In the first couple of years, you've just got to be ready for a little bit of a grind. My wife and I have this joke that early on she'd be like, I don't understand. You work so much harder, so many more hours than all of our friends. But we don't have anything to show for it. And my stock response was always look, in time. And so we're all right, if we ever get a boat, that'll be the name of it. We call it In Time, because it just it takes time. And it's just and it's not glamorous. Being an entrepreneur, as much as people talk about it, it's not glamorous. And it's it's a grind, but you've got to put yourself in a position where it has to work. And when you put yourself in a position where it has to work, you lean into it, especially when you got personal relationships involved that it has to work. It won't be a failure.
Great piece of advice. I love it. If you want to start something, commit to it, make the jump, and it increases your odds of making it happen.
Yeah, well, this has been great, Mike. Appreciate you having me.
Nick, thanks so much for joining us, taking the time. I really appreciate it. And I have taken a look at the software. It looks awesome, super user, super intuitive, and understand why people love it. So great job on the solution. It's very cool.
Thanks, man.